Welcome, my friends, to this Yom Kippur edition of More Bad News, brought to you as always by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camels Challenge, smoke Camels for 30 days, and see for yourself what a difference Camels can make in your life. You know, I've been advertising Camels for over 2 decades now and have yet to receive a dime from my sponsor. They insist that I never actually sold any cigarettes. They say I'm a fraud, claiming to sell cigarettes while all the time mocking them. But you must know by now, if you've been watching this show, that I am genuinely grateful for what tobacco has brought to my life, including memories of smoking with my mom that I will always treasure. As I've said, tobacco is a sacred leaf, a gift of the Creator. Of course, my sponsor may have a point, saying that I haven't done much for their bottom line. You can't smoke Camels on Yom Kippur. And back in the day when I smoked regularly, I would have to stop every Friday before Shabbos. Smoking is strictly forbidden on Shabbos. It was very unusual. I don't think that anyone but Orthodox Jews stopped smoking one day a week. Most people habituated to smoking would never think of taking a 24-hour break from smoking, just as no one habituated to coffee would think of taking a 24-hour break from caffeine. Now, the Sabbath begins with the lighting of the candles on Friday evening, about 20 minutes before sundown. And from that point on, smoking is strictly forbidden. So most Jewish smokers, would have one last cigarette before candle lighting. And once Shabbos was over on Saturday night, the first thing a habituated smoker would do would be to light up. I didn't have any problem doing that. It wasn't just once a week. Every once in a while, I would just stop smoking for a few months or so, not because I was trying to quit, but just because I didn't feel like it. And long after I had stopped smoking regularly, I'd buy a pack of Camels on my mother's yahrzeit. In her last years, we would sit together in the mornings when I came to visit in Albuquerque and smoke Salems and Cools and drink black coffee. I have very precious memories from these mornings. Well, it's been another week of very bad news. This past week, Hurricane Ian laid waste to large swaths of Florida coast. Just a week earlier, monsoon rains on steroids, combined with unprecedented glacial runoff, flooded nearly 2/3 of Pakistan, displacing 33 million people. It was one of the worst environmental disasters on record. And as Antonio Guterres said at the time, today it's Pakistan, tomorrow it'll be your country. The storm washed over Sanibel Island with 16-foot swells and 150-mile-an-hour winds and laid waste to the island. It went on to hit Fort Myer, a resort town of 92,000, but was utterly destroyed by the storm. Over 10,000 people are in shelters after being forced to evacuate their homes. This storm follows Andrew, Irma, and Michael, 2017 and 2018. In fact, more tropical hurricanes hit Florida than any other state, and the hurricane season has only just begun. In 2005, there were 28 named hurricanes. Over the next 5 years, the coastal region of Florida will become unlivable. The poor, especially women and children, will suffer the most. Keep in mind that all of this suffering takes place as the fossil fuel companies are making billions in windfall profits and subsidies. So now we're in the 10 days of repentance. According to Jewish tradition, on Rosh Hashanah, God takes out the book of life and records everyone's fate for the next year. As we read in the Unisana Tokef, a prayer written in the 11th century CE, on Rosh Hashanah it is inscribed, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. How many shall pass away, and how many shall be born? Who shall live, and who shall die? Who in good time, and who by untimely death? Who by water, and who by fire? Who by sword, and who by famine? Who by thirst? Who by earthquake, and who by plague? Who shall have rest, and who shall wander? Who shall be at peace, and who shall be pursued? Who shall be serene, and who shall be tormented? Who shall be impoverished, and who shall be made wealthy? But repentance, prayer, and kindness can avert the severity of the decree. So this week I wanted to say a few words about repentance. My parents weren't particularly religious. My mom often went to the beauty parlor on Shabbos, and like so many Jewish families of my generation, we enjoyed the all-you-can-eat buffet at the local Chinese restaurant. So I grew up eating shrimp and pork. Now, I have five brothers. I had five brothers, and basically, I got hand-me-downs and from my two older brothers until my bar mitzvah, when suddenly I was the center of attention. We had a huge party, and I got lots of presents. But something else happened at my bar mitzvah. My bar mitzvah was a moment of epiphany for me. My grandfather died in 1955 when I was just 8. Once a year or so, my parents would announce that we were going to the city to visit Zaidi. He was an elderly man who wore strange clothes and had a beard and spoke in Yiddish. He wasn't particularly affectionate, and I have no memory of him hugging me, and I really didn't understand who he was. Then at my bar mitzvah, a great aunt came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, "Your Zeta would be so proud of you." And it suddenly hit me who that old man was. Something moved inside of me. I felt a deep sense of loss, especially after learning that my Zeta was a scholar. After watching a movie about Benny Goodman, I had decided to become a famous clarinetist. So my dad bought me a Bootsy Hawkes clarinet and hired a young musician to come to the house once a week and teach me how to be another Benny Goodman. I had no talent, mind you. I couldn't carry a tune, which must have been apparent to my dad. My uncle was a wonderful cantor. There was lots of musical talent in the family. So it was pretty obvious to everyone but me that I couldn't carry a tune. My dad never let on. He encouraged me to follow my dream. And I will always love him for that. After my bar mitzvah, I told my father that I had changed my mind about the direction of my life. I wanted to become a rabbi. I wanted my Zaidi to be proud of me. My dad thought that that was a great idea, and I ended up transferring from the local public school in Hicksville, New York, to Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim in Queens. Now, I was in no way prepared for yeshiva. I could barely read Hebrew, but Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim had a special program to help boys like me integrate into yeshiva life. Now, remember that I was the dead child walking. I was hospitalized about once a year from age 3 to 12, and the illness impacted my progress in school. I was always in need of remedial help. I was always behind, and my IQ reflected my illness. My dad had actually done groundbreaking work with the famous psychologist Edward L. Thorndike, who was measuring IQs of school children in New York. And my dad had an assistantship at Columbia University where he ran these IQ tests. He believed that IQ was a measure of ability, that it was innate, fixed. My brother Edward was quick. I was slow. So when we met with the principal of Chavetz Chaim High School, Rabbi Zechariah Fendel, my dad started to explain to Rabbi Fendel his concern that I might not have the IQ to study Talmud. Rabbi Fendel stopped my father in his tracks by saying that he didn't believe in IQ. He believed in God. He believed that what was important was a student's devotion, not his intelligence. And then he turned to me and said, "Binyamin, here we study all day, every day. Is that what you want to do?" And with tears in my eyes, I said yes. And without any further inquiry, Rabbi Fendel handed my dad papers to sign. My life was about to take a radical turn. I loved studying the Talmud. Chavetz Chaim was a Mussar yeshiva that followed in the traditions of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who believed that education had to focus on the moral development of the students. The educational program was extremely rigorous. We studied from 8:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., with our secular subjects taking up the period from 3 to 6:30. The bulk of our day was 6 days a week was spent studying Gemara. The boys all lived in the yeshiva, and after dinner, most of us went down to the study hall to review the materials that we had learned during the day until it was time to go to bed. Chavetz Chaim was a very small school with one building and about 60 students. There were 12 students in my class. But there was a kollel attached to the yeshiva. That is, there were about a dozen young men who received a stipend to spend their days in our study hall. They weren't expected to teach, and they didn't have to publish. All they needed to do was study. There was no requirement to produce anything. But here was the point. The reason we study Talmud is not so that we can use it as a tool. We don't study to sharpen our minds. We don't study it to become a rabbi. We study it in order to sustain the universe. I believe that there was nothing holier or more important than studying the Talmud. And today, I sit every morning with my Zayda's Gemara, a magnificent first edition of the Vilna Talmud, printed between 1858 and 1862, and I study it for the simple joy of it. Well, that's all for this week, folks. You know, the period between Rosh Hashanah and the 8 days of Sukkot is known as the holiday season. In Israel, hardly anything gets done during the holidays. You often hear people say that they will attend to something after the holidays. In Israel, the school semester begins in October after the holidays. There's no point in starting the fall semester in September and having to interrupt it for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, and Shmini Atzeres. You might as well wait until the holidays are over. And so we will continue the holiday-themed presentations and return to our regular programming after the holidays. Have a good week, everyone. And may the new year be a good one for all of us. See you next week.